I was sitting in my friend's art studio. It was like being in the belly of the artist, this sacred place that just feels magical and where you know magic is created. The space looked like you'd imagine an art studio to look like: paint splattered all over the walls and the floor, buckets and bottles of paint stacked up in the corners, dozens of canvases half finished piled up against the wall, and art hanging everywhere. We're probably about 2 glasses of wine in or so at this point, and just having this beautiful, inspired, alive conversation that you imagine that happens between 2 creatives. And mid-sentence, it seemed, he got up and he just goes and grabs this huge painting off the wall, one that to me looked finished, and he puts it on the ground and grabs this bottle of paint, and almost with like a feeling of shock and horror, like I'm watching a child with a Sharpie about to go and draw across the Mona Lisa, I shout at him going like, "What are you doing? What if you ruin the whole thing?" With a bit of a smile on his face and in total confidence, he sort of looks at me like confused, like, "What do you mean I'm gonna wreck the whole thing?" And I realize he actually knows what he's doing. So I calm myself down for a moment and I ask him, "How do you know you won't ruin it?" And he goes on to share with me these 3 pieces of wisdom that have never left me. He starts by saying, "I look at the piece and at what I already know I think is done. It's finished and I don't want it touched anymore." And he grabs this cloth and he kind of covers that area of the painting. And then he says, I look at the piece and kind of decide, where do I want the paint and how do I want it to run? So I use gravity. And he goes and props up one corner of the painting. And then he shares the 3rd thing, which he says, "I have an overall vision of what I want the piece to be, not overly attached to exactly how it needs to look, but I have an overall sense of it." When he shared these 3 pieces to me, it just felt like this wisdom that washed over me, that I could connect into all areas of my life, of know which are the parts that you know are sacred and don't need to be touched, and you protect those with boundaries. And then use the universal laws of nature to support you to create in the things that you're bringing forward in the world. He used gravity. And the 3rd was being able to hold this vision and know your vision, but don't be so caught and so fine-tuned into it that you can't allow yourself to pick up a bottle of paint and just whip it at it and play and see where that might go. So feeling so inspired and really trusting he knows what he's doing, I still felt compelled to ask, "But what if you really ruin the whole thing?" And he looks at me without missing a beat and says, "And I just paint the whole thing white." "You paint the whole thing white?" And then he goes on to share this story with me about this time that he was working on a painting, which probably has happened many times. He was working on this painting and it started to get to this point that he says he'll get to where it just shouldn't be this hard. It just shouldn't be that hard. And he knows he's been working it, and it just shouldn't be this hard. And he painted the whole canvas white and almost immediately started to paint on it again. And what was coming out on the canvas was this beautiful rhino. And he finished it quite quickly. And the next day that rhino sold. And I sat there listening to this whole story. And it brought me right back to why I named my company White Box Leadership. My white box is the white canvas. And just like the painter paints his canvas white when he knows he's at a place where it just doesn't need to be that hard, and lets the rhino appear, I've taken myself back into my white box, painted my canvas white hundreds of times, and allowed myself to see that pure essence of inspiration and aliveness and joy and love that is true to me. And it's guided me and continues to guide me to that larger vision that I hold so gently. And so I ask you, where are you now? And is it time for you to step into your white box?